The darkness had teeth. That was the only way Elena could describe it anymore. After 3 days in the basement, with nothing but the smell of mold and her own fear. The stone floor pressed cold against her cheek, and somewhere above her head, Marcus's footsteps creaked across the kitchen floor, in a rhythm she'd learned to read like a language. Heavy steps meant he was drunk. Light steps meant he was planning something worse than usual. These steps were light. Her wrists ached where the zip ties cut into her skin, tight enough to leave marks but loose enough that he could claim it was an accident if anyone ever asked. Not that anyone would ask. Marcus had made sure of that years ago, slowly cutting away her friends, her family, her job, until she was nothing but a ghost in her own life. The single bulb hanging from the ceiling had burned out yesterday, or maybe the day before. Time moved differently in the dark. She'd tried counting heartbeats, but fear made them irregular, skipping and stuttering like a broken clock. Her stomach had stopped growling hours ago, collapsed into a tight knot of nothing. The last meal had been 4 days ago, before she'd made the mistake of answering her phone when her sister called, before Marcus had seen her smile at someone else's voice and decided she needed to be taught another lesson about loyalty, about knowing her place, about remembering who owned her. The basement door opened. Light spilled down the stairs, painful after so much darkness, and Elena squeezed her eyes shut against the sudden brightness. She heard him descend, each footfall deliberate, taking his time. He liked it when she was scared, fed on it like some people fed on compliments. His shadow fell across her face, blocking out the light. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying that dangerous softness that meant he was enjoying himself. "Have you learned your lesson yet?" She didn't answer. Sometimes answering made it worse. Sometimes silence made it worse. There was no winning formula, no way to predict which version of Marcus would appear. That was part of the design, she'd realized. The unpredictability kept her off balance, kept her trying to please him, kept her compliant. "I asked you a question." His boot pressed against her shoulder, not quite kicking, not quite gentle, just enough pressure to remind her he could do worse. "Yes," she whispered. Her voice came out cracked and dry, a stranger's voice. "I've learned." "Good." He crouched down, and she smelled the whiskey on his breath, the expensive cologne he wore to cover the stink of violence. "Because I'm going to keep you down here until you really understand, Elena, until you get it through your thick skull that you don't smile at other people. You don't talk to other people. You belong to me." The words should have terrified her. They had terrified her for years, each threat carving itself into her bones until she walked through life bent under their weight. But something had shifted in the darkness. Maybe it was the hunger. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was the absolute certainty that if she didn't do something, she would die in this basement, and no one would even know to look for her. Marcus stood up, brushing dirt from his knees as if her suffering had contaminated him somehow. "I'll check on you tomorrow," he said cheerfully. "See if you're ready to come upstairs and be a good wife again." The door closed. The light disappeared. The lock clicked with a finality that sounded like a gravestone settling into place. Elena lay in the darkness, tasting blood where she'd bitten her lip, feeling the cold seep into her bones. And then she remembered. It was such a small thing, something she'd overheard years ago in a cafe, back when she was still allowed to go to cafes. 2 women at the next table, speaking in hushed voices about old legends, about names that shouldn't be spoken aloud, about a vampire king who'd ruled in the shadows for centuries. One of them had laughed, nervous and thrilled, and said his name like a dare. Azrael Tenebris. That was it. A name from a story, from a legend, from something that couldn't possibly be real. But Elena was dying in a basement with zip ties cutting into her wrists, and real didn't matter anymore. Only survival mattered. Only the slim chance that somewhere in the universe, someone might hear her. She didn't believe in vampires, didn't believe in magic or legends or anything she couldn't touch and prove. But she believed in desperation. She believed in the human instinct to reach for anything, even fantasy, when the alternative was giving up. Her lips moved, forming the syllables carefully in the dark. Azrael Tenebris. The name felt strange in her mouth, too formal, too ancient. She tried again, louder this time, her voice cracking but determined. Azrael Tenebris, please. I don't know if you're real. I don't know if you can hear me. But if you can, if there's any chance, any possibility, I need help. I need someone to see me. I need someone to know I'm here. The darkness pressed in, heavy and unmoved. Of course nothing happened. She was losing her mind, talking to legends in a basement, wasting her last energy on fairy tales. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, hot against her cold cheeks. She'd been so stupid to hope, even for a second. And then the temperature dropped. Not gradually, the way cold creeps in through drafty windows, but instantly, like someone had opened a door to winter itself. Elena's breath formed clouds in front of her face, visible even in the pitch darkness. The air pressure changed, pressing against her eardrums, making her teeth ache. And something moved in the corner of the basement, where nothing had been before. A figure materialized from shadows that were somehow darker than the surrounding dark, taking shape like smoke, learning to be solid. He was tall, impossibly tall, with shoulders that blocked out what little ambient light seeped through the gaps in the floorboards above. His eyes caught that light and threw it back like a cat's, silver bright and utterly inhuman. You called my name. His voice wasn't loud, but it filled the basement completely, resonating in Elena's chest like the lowest note of an organ. It was a voice that had commanded armies, ended wars, spoken to kings, and watched them kneel. And it was speaking to her. Elena's breath caught. She tried to scramble backward, but the zip ties and her own weakness kept her pinned to the floor. The figure moved closer, and details emerged from the darkness. He wore black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, tailored perfectly to his frame. His face was carved from marble and moonlight, beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, with sharp cheekbones and a mouth that had forgotten how to smile. His hair fell to his shoulders, dark as ink, and when he tilted his head, studying her, she saw the faint outline of something ancient in his expression. Something that had seen centuries pass like seasons. She started, then stopped, her voice failing. What was she supposed to say? How did you address a legend that had stepped out of desperation and into reality? He crouched down, moving with fluid grace that no human body could replicate, and his eyes fixed on her face. Silver eyes, she realized. Not gray, not blue, but actual silver, like molten metal cooling in darkness. You're hurt, he observed. Not a question. A statement of fact, delivered without emotion. Who did this? Marcus, Elena whispered. My husband. He locked me down here. I think he's going to let me die. The Vampire King's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air around him. The temperature dropped another few degrees, and Elena saw frost forming on the stone walls, spreading out from where he knelt like frozen lightning. How long? 3 days without food. 4, maybe. I lost count. She was shaking now, whether from cold or shock or relief, she couldn't tell. Are you really Azrael Tenebris, or am I hallucinating? I am. He reached toward her wrists, and she flinched instinctively. He paused, his hand hovering in the air between them. "I'm going to remove these restraints. I will not hurt you." His touch was ice cold when his fingers found the zip ties, but not painful. Just cool, like pressing your hand against a window in winter. The plastic snapped as if it were paper, and blood rushed back into Elena's hands, bringing pins and needles and pain that made her gasp. She tried to sit up, but her muscles had gone liquid from days of immobility and fear. The Vampire King caught her before she collapsed completely, his hands steady on her shoulders. "When did you last drink water?" She tried to remember. The pipes, she managed. "I could reach the utility sink." "Barely." "Good," he said, and something that might have been approval flickered across his features. "You're a survivor." He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest with the same care someone might use for broken glass. His body was cool through her clothes, but not uncomfortably so. Just different. Just other. Through the darkness, she felt him move, not walking up the stairs, but simply traveling through space in a way her mind couldn't quite process. One moment they were in the basement. The next, they were standing in her kitchen, where Marcus had left dirty dishes in the sink and his empty whiskey bottle on the counter. The Vampire King set her down in a chair, but his hand remained on her shoulder, keeping her stable. "Where is he?" "Upstairs," Elena said, sleeping it off. "He'll wake up in a few hours and come down to check if I've learned my lesson." The words tasted bitter in her mouth, years of humiliation and fear condensed into a single sentence. "Stay here," Azrael commanded, and then he was gone, moving up the stairs with silence that defied physics. Elena sat in her kitchen, shaking, trying to make her brain accept what was happening. A Vampire King was in her house. She'd called him from a legend, and he'd come. And now he was upstairs with Marcus, and she didn't know whether to be terrified or grateful. She heard a sound from above. Not a scream, not a fight. Just a soft thump, like something heavy being set down with care. Then footsteps on the stairs, measured and calm. Azrael descended into the kitchen, and Elena saw that his hands were clean, his clothes undisturbed. Whatever he'd done it efficiently. Is he? She couldn't finish the question. "Alive," the Vampire King said. "Unconscious. He will wake in several hours with a headache and no memory of the past week. When he remembers you, it will be with fear. He will not touch you again." Elena stared at him. "That's it? You didn't kill him? Would you like me to?" The question was asked with perfect sincerity, no judgment, no emotion. Just a simple inquiry about her preferences. "No," Elena said quickly, then paused, really thinking about it. "Maybe? I don't know. I just want him to never hurt me again." "He won't," Azrael said with absolute certainty. "The command is written in his mind now. He will avoid you as if you carry plague. And if he breaks this command, if he so much as speaks your name with intent to harm, I will know, and I will return." He moved to the sink, filled a glass with water, and brought it to her. "Drink slowly," he instructed. "Your body needs time to adjust." Elena took the glass with trembling hands and sipped. The water was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. Cool and clean and real. She drank half the glass before setting it down, afraid she'd make herself sick. "Why did you come?" she asked. "When I called you, why did you actually appear?" Azrael pulled out the chair across from her and sat, the movement oddly formal, as if he were attending a council meeting rather than sitting in a stranger's kitchen at 3 in the morning. Because you called my true name with genuine need, he said, and because it has been a very long time since anyone believed enough to try. Most humans think I'm a story now, a legend told to frighten children. But you called anyway. Elena wrapped her hands around the water glass, feeling the condensation wet against her palms. I didn't really believe. I just had nothing else left to try. Sometimes nothing is all we need, Azrael said, and for the first time, something almost human flickered in his silver eyes. Sometimes desperation opens doors that faith cannot. You need food, Azrael said, rising from the chair with that same fluid grace that made Elena's stomach flip. And medical attention. Your wrists are damaged. I'm fine, Elena said automatically, the response so practiced it came out before she could think about it. Then she looked down at her wrists, saw the deep purple bruises, the cuts where the zip ties had bit into her skin, and realized she was lying. I'm not fine. The Vampire King's expression shifted, something that might have been satisfaction crossing his features. Truth is a better foundation than politeness, he observed. Can you walk? I think so. Elena pushed herself up from the chair, and her legs immediately tried to betray her. She grabbed the table edge, knocking over the water glass. It shattered on the floor, and she flinched at the sound, waiting for Marcus to come storming down, angry about the noise, about the mess, about her existence. But Marcus was upstairs, unconscious, and the only person in the kitchen was Azrael Tenebris, who was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You flinched, he said quietly. From broken glass. No. From what breaking things usually means in this house. Understanding crossed his face, cold and sharp as a blade. Come with me. It wasn't a command, exactly. More like an inevitability, stated with certainty. Where? Somewhere safe. Somewhere he'll never find you, even if he breaks the compulsion I've placed on his mind. Somewhere you can heal. Elena looked around her kitchen. The dishes Marcus had left for her to clean. The cigarette burns on the counter from when he'd gotten angry about dinner. The dent in the wall where he'd thrown a plate that had missed her head by inches. 5 years of her life, compressed into a room that smelled like fear and bleach. She'd scrubbed this floor on her hands and knees more times than she could count, trying to make everything perfect enough that he'd stop finding reasons to be angry. Okay, she said. Take me somewhere else. Azrael extended his hand, palm up, waiting. Elena placed her damaged hand in his, and the world dissolved. It wasn't like fainting or falling asleep. It was like the universe decided to fold itself into a new shape, and when it finished folding, Elena was standing in a room that looked like it had been carved from midnight itself. The walls were black stone, smooth and cool, lit by candles that burned without flickering. The ceiling arched high overhead, disappearing into shadows that moved with their own slow rhythm. Furniture emerged from the darkness, elegant and spare. A bed, draped in silver silk. A chair positioned near a fireplace, where flames danced, in shades of blue and green. This is my home, Azrael said, releasing her hand. The palace, at the heart of my realm. You'll be safe here. Elena's legs finally gave out completely, and she sat down hard on the floor, her back against the wall. The stone was surprisingly warm, not cold like she'd expected. She pressed her palms flat against it, needing something solid, something real. I'm in a vampire's palace, she said aloud, testing the words. I called a legend, and he came, and now I'm in his palace. Yes, Azrael confirmed, crouching down to her level. Are you going to drink my blood? Or turn me into a vampire? Or keep me prisoner? No to all three, he said, and something that might have been amusement touched the corners of his mouth. I don't drink from unwilling sources. I don't create new vampires without their informed consent. And you're not a prisoner. You're a guest. You can leave whenever you wish." Elena laughed, a broken sound that didn't contain much humor. "And go where? Back to Marcus? To a house where I almost died? I have nowhere else." "Then stay here until you have somewhere," Azrael said simply. "Heal. Rest. Decide what you want your life to look like without fear shaping every choice." A knock sounded on the door, soft but audible. The Vampire King rose and opened it, revealing a woman who looked about 40, with kind eyes and flour on her apron. "This is Mrs. Thorne," Azrael said. "She manages the household staff. She'll see to your needs." "Mrs. Thorne, this is Elena. She's under my protection." The older woman's eyes widened slightly, but she curtsied with practiced grace. "Of course, Your Majesty." She turned to Elena, her expression softening. "Oh, you poor dear. Let's get you cleaned up and fed, shall we? Some warm soup and fresh bandages, and we'll have you feeling better in no time." Elena wanted to protest, to say she didn't deserve kindness, that she was just a stranger who'd stumbled into something impossible. But Mrs. Thorne was already helping her to her feet with gentle hands, clucking over her bruises like a concerned aunt. "Come along, dear. His Majesty's quarters have a lovely bathing room. You'll feel human again after a proper wash." As Mrs. Thorne led her toward an archway Elena hadn't noticed before, she glanced back at Azrael. The Vampire King stood in the center of the room, watching her with those silver eyes that saw too much. "Thank you," Elena said, "for hearing me. For coming. For this." He inclined his head slightly, a gesture that carried centuries of courtly manners. "You called," he said simply. "I answered. That is what power is for, helping those who cannot help themselves." Then he was gone, dissolving into shadows as if he'd never been there at all. Mrs. Thorne patted Elena's arm. "Don't mind his dramatics, dear. Vampires do love their mysterious exits. But his heart's in the right place, even if it doesn't beat anymore." She led Elena through the archway into a bathing room that looked like something from a dream. A massive tub carved from white marble, already filling with steaming water that smelled of lavender and something else. Something soothing she couldn't name. Soft towels stacked on a shelf. Candles casting warm light across walls, painted the color of cream. "Let's get you sorted," Mrs. Thorne said, helping Elena out of her filthy clothes with the matter-of-fact kindness of someone who'd seen suffering before and refused to be shocked by it. The water was almost too hot, but Elena sank into it anyway, letting the heat work its way into her cold bones. Mrs. Thorne had left her alone after making sure she could manage, promising to return with food and proper bandages. The silence was strange. For 3 days, Elena had been alone in darkness, but that had been the silence of abandonment, of being forgotten. This was different. This was the silence of safety, of being exactly where she was supposed to be. She scrubbed her skin until it turned pink, washing away the basement smell, the fear, the feeling of Marcus's boot against her shoulder. The water turned gray, then brown, carrying away the evidence of her captivity. She dunked her head under, held her breath, and when she surfaced, she felt almost new. Almost. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Thorne's voice came through the door. "I'm leaving clothes on the chair, dear, and some soup on the table. Take your time. The food spelled to stay warm." Elena wrapped herself in a towel that was softer than anything she'd owned in years, and found the clothes waiting for her. A simple dress in deep blue, soft as water, that fit perfectly despite no one having measured her. She pulled it on, marveling at how it moved with her body instead of restricting it. The soup was waiting on a small table near the fireplace, And when Elena lifted the spoon to her lips, she tasted rosemary and chicken and something that made her want to cry with how good it was. She ate slowly, carefully, aware that her stomach needed time to adjust after days of emptiness. Someone had left bread too, fresh and warm, and butter that melted into golden pools. She was halfway through her second bowl when the door opened, and a small figure appeared in the doorway. A boy, maybe 6 years old, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the same silver as Azriel's. He wore pajamas decorated with stars and moons, and he clutched a stuffed dragon against his chest. The boy stared at Elena with solemn intensity, then signed something with his free hand, the movements quick and fluid. Elena shook her head helplessly. "I'm sorry. I don't understand." The boy's face fell, disappointment clear in his expression. He signed again, slower this time, but Elena could only shrug apologetically. A figure appeared behind the boy, and Elena's heart jumped when she recognized Azriel. The Vampire King's hand rested gently on the child's shoulder. "Kieran," he signed, his movements careful and deliberate. "This is Elena. She doesn't know sign language yet." The boy, Kieran, looked up at his father with a question in his eyes. Azriel nodded to whatever he saw there, then looked at Elena. "My son wanted to know if you're the lady from the basement. He heard me telling Mrs. Thorne about your arrival." Elena set down her spoon, studying the little boy who was studying her right back. "You have a son." "I do," Azriel confirmed. "Kieran is 6. He was born deaf. He speaks only with his hands." The pieces clicked into place, the way Azriel had understood about survival, about being trapped, about needing someone to see you. "Does he live here with you?" "Always," Azriel said, and something fierce entered his voice. "His mother died when he was 2. It's been the 2 of us since then." Kieran tugged on his father's sleeve and signed something else. "What did he ask?" Elena said. "He wants to know if you like dragons," Azriel translated, a hint of warmth in his tone. "He's very particular about people's opinions on dragons." Elena looked at the stuffed dragon in Kieran's arms, worn soft from what must have been years of dedicated hugging. "I think dragons are wonderful," she said, speaking directly to the boy, even though he couldn't hear her. "The best creatures in any story." Azriel's hands moved, translating. Kieran's face split into a smile, and he ran to Elena, climbing into the chair beside her and showing her the dragon enthusiastically. His hands flew as he signed, telling her something with animated gestures. "He says, the dragon's name is Ember," Azriel translated, moving closer. "And Ember protects him from bad dreams." Elena felt something crack open in her chest, some place she'd kept locked because opening it hurt too much. This little boy, showing her his most precious possession with complete trust, had no idea how much that trust meant to someone who'd forgotten what trust felt like. "Ember looks very brave," she said, and Azriel translated. Kieran signed something else, his expression growing serious. "What did he say?" Elena asked. "He asked if you had bad dreams too," Azriel said quietly, "and if you need protection from them." Elena looked at this 6-year-old boy with silver eyes who'd somehow understood exactly what she needed. "Yes," she said, her voice thick. "I do have bad dreams, but I think I'm safer now." Kieran nodded solemnly, then did something that made Elena's eyes sting with tears. He handed her Ember. When she looked confused, Azriel translated again. "He says Ember can protect both of you. He's very good at it. You can borrow him tonight." Elena took the dragon with shaking hands, cradling it against her chest the way Kieran had been holding it moments before. "Thank you," she whispered. "This is the kindest thing anyone's done for me in a very long time." Azriel's expression softened as he watched his son climb down from the chair and sign good night. After Kieran left, padding away down the corridor with Mrs. Thorne, appearing to guide him back to bed, Azrael remained. He should be asleep, the Vampire King said. But he heard me talking about someone in need, and he's never been good at staying in bed when he thinks he can help. He gets that from his mother. Elena clutched Ember, feeling the dragon's worn softness against her palms. You loved her. I did, Azrael said simply. She was human. Kind. Brilliant. Fierce. She saw me, not the legend. When she died in childbirth, I thought I'd lost my ability to feel anything beyond duty. But then Kieran was born, and I learned I could still break. His eyes found hers. I know what it's like to feel powerless, to have all the strength in the world, and none of it matter when it counts. Elena understood then why he'd come when she called. Not just because of duty or ancient compulsion, but because he remembered what it felt like to be desperate and afraid and unable to save what mattered most. Elena woke to sunlight, streaming through windows. She didn't remember being there. The bed was impossibly soft, the sheets cool against her skin, and for a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then she saw Ember sitting on the pillow beside her head, button eyes watching over her sleep, and everything came rushing back. The basement. The whispered name. Azrael Tenebris appearing from shadows, like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known she was praying. A soft knock preceded Mrs. Thorne entering with a tray. Good morning, dear. His Majesty thought you might like breakfast in bed while you're recovering. The older woman set the tray across Elena's lap, revealing fresh fruit, warm pastries, and tea that smelled like honey and chamomile. How did you sleep? Better than I have in years, Elena admitted. The nightmares didn't come. Mrs. Thorne smiled knowingly. Ember's good at keeping nightmares away. Young Kieran's quite insistent about that. Elena bit into a pastry, and flavor exploded across her tongue, buttery and perfect. Mrs. Thorne, can I ask you something? Of course, dear. How long have you worked here? 37 years, the older woman said, settling into the chair near the bed. I came here after my husband died. I had nowhere to go, no family left, and I'd heard rumors about a vampire king who might need household help. Everyone thought I was mad, walking up to the palace gates and asking for employment, but His Majesty hired me on the spot. Said anyone brave enough to ask deserved a chance. Is he always like this? Rescuing people? Mrs. Thorne's expression turned thoughtful. He helps when he can. But he's careful about it. The vampire world has rules, politics, territories. If he intervened every time a human was in trouble, it would start wars. She paused, pouring Elena more tea. But sometimes, when someone calls his true name with genuine need, the old laws apply. He can act without political consequences. Elena sipped her tea, processing this. So I accidentally invoked some kind of ancient protocol? Something like that, Mrs. Thorne confirmed. Though between you and me, I think you remind him of someone. His late wife? The older woman shook her head. Himself. Before he became king, when he was just a young vampire trying to survive in a world that wanted him dead. After breakfast, Elena found herself wandering the palace corridors, Ember tucked under her arm. The architecture was impossible, hallways that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking, rooms that appeared and disappeared like thoughts. She found a library that made her gasp, walls lined floor to ceiling with books that smelled of leather and time. A conservatory filled with night-blooming flowers that glowed faintly in the shadows. A music room with instruments she didn't recognize. She found Azrael in a courtyard garden, sitting on a stone bench with Kieran beside him. The boy's hands were moving rapidly, telling some story that made his whole body animate with excitement. Asriel watched with complete focus, occasionally signing a question that sent Kieran off on another tangent of enthusiastic explanation. Elena stood in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt, just watching this vampire king be a father. There was something achingly gentle about the way he corrected Kieran's signs, the way he leaned down to catch the boy's eye when he was making an important point. The way he smiled, really smiled, at something his son signed. They sensed her presence at the same moment. Kieran waved enthusiastically, and Asriel gestured for her to join them. "You're exploring," the vampire king observed as she sat down on the bench. "Finding your way around." "Trying to," Elena said. "This place is beautiful. It's also confusing." "The palace responds to intention," Asriel explained. "If you need to find something specific, think about it clearly, and the corridors will guide you." Elena tested this, thinking firmly about the library. When she glanced back toward the doorway, she could have sworn the corridor beyond had shifted, pointing a different direction than before. Kieran tugged on her sleeve and signed something. "He's asking if you slept well with Ember," Asriel translated. "Better than I have in a long time," Elena said, and watched Asriel's hands move, carrying her words to his son. Kieran beamed and signed something else, longer this time. "He says Ember told him you had nightmares, but he chased them away, and he wants to know if you'd like to help him feed the night gardens. The plants get lonely if only one person visits them." Elena felt that crack in her chest open wider. "How do I say yes in sign language?" Asriel showed her, guiding her hands through the simple gesture. Kieran grabbed her hand immediately, pulling her toward the garden paths with 6-year-old enthusiasm that transcended any language barrier. They spent the afternoon among flowers that only bloomed in darkness, Kieran showing her which ones liked to be sung to, which ones preferred silence, which ones would glow brighter if you told them secrets. The boy's hands never stopped moving, explaining, questioning, sharing, and slowly Elena began to recognize patterns in his signs. The gesture for flower, the gesture for happy, the gesture for friend. Asriel watched from the bench, occasionally translating when Elena got confused, but mostly just letting them communicate in the universal language of kind gestures and shared wonder. When Kieran got distracted by a butterfly, Elena sat beside the vampire king. "Thank you for this," she said quietly, "for letting me be part of his world. He needs more people in his life," Asriel said. "Mrs. Thorne is wonderful, but she's getting older. And the other vampires at court, they're kind, but they don't always understand children, especially children who are different." Elena watched Kieran chase the butterfly, his silent laughter visible in the joy on his face. "In my village," she said slowly, "before I married Marcus, I worked with the school teacher. We had a student who was deaf. Her name was Sophie. I learned some sign language then, but it's been years. I've forgotten most of it. Would you like to remember?" Asriel asked. "I could teach you." Kieran would be thrilled to have another person to talk to. The lesson started the next morning in the library. Asriel had cleared a table near the window, setting out books on sign language, charts showing hand positions, and parchment for taking notes. Kieran sat between them, appointed as assistant teacher, taking his role very seriously. "Sign language is visual grammar," Asriel explained, his hands moving as he spoke, demonstrating each concept. "The expression on your face, the speed of your hands, the space around your body, they all carry meaning. It's not just translation, it's its own complete language." Elena copied his movements, fingers fumbling through the alphabet, through basic phrases. Kieran corrected her gently when her hand shapes were wrong, his small fingers repositioning hers with patient concentration. They started with simple concepts. Hello. Thank you. I understand. I don't understand. Please. The words felt strange forming in her hands instead of her mouth, but also natural, as if her body had been waiting to learn this communication method all along. By the end of the first week, Elena could sign basic conversations. She learned that Kieran loved stories about brave knights and dragons, that his favorite color was silver like his father's eyes, that he wished he could hear music but loved feeling the vibrations when Mrs. Thorne played the piano. She learned that Azrael had been teaching his son since birth, determined that Kieran would never feel limited by his deafness, that sign language would be valued in the palace as much as spoken words. On the 8th day, Elena was practicing vocabulary in the courtyard when she signed a phrase that made Azrael freeze. "What did I say wrong?" she asked. "Nothing," he said quietly. "You signed, 'My heart is healing here,' perfectly." Elena looked at her hands, realizing the truth of what they'd said, without her conscious permission. "I didn't mean to," she started, then stopped. "That's not true. I did mean to. I just didn't realize I was ready to say it." "You're safe here," Azrael said, "for as long as you need. But you're also free to leave whenever you choose." "I know," Elena said. "That's what makes it safe." Kieran interrupted by throwing himself into Elena's lap, signing frantically about a bird he'd seen in the garden. She caught perhaps half the signs, but his enthusiasm needed no translation. She'd been at the palace for 2 weeks when Mrs. Thorne found her in the library, looking worried. "There's a man at the gates, dear, asking for you by name." Elena's blood turned to ice. "Marcus. I don't know how he found this place," Mrs. Thorne said quickly, "but His Majesty is handling it. You don't have to see him if you don't want to." "I should," Elena heard herself say, surprised by her own voice. "I should face him. Not because I owe him anything, but because I need to see that he can't hurt me anymore." Mrs. Thorne squeezed her hand. "Then we'll go together." The palace gates were wrought iron that seemed to grow from the ground itself, twisted into patterns that hurt to look at directly. Marcus stood on the other side, looking smaller than Elena remembered, diminished somehow. Azrael stood between them, and even from a distance, Elena could feel the cold radiating from the Vampire King. Marcus's eyes found Elena, and something like relief crossed his face. "Elena, thank God. I've been looking everywhere for you. You disappeared, and I thought something terrible had happened." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that Elena almost believed it herself. Almost. But she'd had 2 weeks of safety, 2 weeks of seeing what real care looked like, and Marcus's performance couldn't fool her anymore. "I know what you did," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I know you locked me in the basement. I know you were going to let me die." Marcus's expression flickered, confusion replacing the fake concern. "What are you talking about? You've been sick, Elena. Delusional. That's why I've been so worried. Come home and I'll take care of you." Azrael moved slightly, and Marcus stumbled backward as if shoved by invisible hands. "You will not speak to her again," the Vampire King said, his voice carrying power that made the iron gates vibrate. "You will not think her name. You will not dream of her face. You are severed from her existence as completely as if she had never been born." "But she's my wife," Marcus protested, and Elena saw real fear enter his eyes as he finally understood what he was facing. "No," Azrael said. "She was a woman you trapped and hurt. That ends now." The Vampire King raised his hand, and Marcus's face went blank. Elena watched as Azrael wrote new commands into her ex-husband's mind, reshaping memories, redirecting thoughts. building walls that would make it impossible for Marcus to seek her out again. When Azrael lowered his hand, Marcus blinked slowly, looking around as if waking from a dream. "Where am I?" he muttered, then turned and walked away, not even glancing back. Elena watched him disappear down the road, getting smaller and smaller until he was just a speck, then nothing. She waited for something to break inside her, for tears or rage or relief, but all she felt was tired. "It's done," Azrael said gently. "He won't remember you. He'll build a new life that doesn't include hurting anyone. The compulsion I placed ensures it." Elena nodded slowly. "I thought I'd feel different, victorious or devastated or something. Instead, I just feel empty." "That's normal," Mrs. Thorne said, appearing at her elbow. "You've carried him like a weight for so long that freedom feels strange. Give yourself time to grow into the space he left behind." They walked back to the palace together, and Elena realized that Kieran was waiting in the courtyard, Ember clutched to his chest. The boy's eyes were worried, his small face creased with concern. When he saw her, he ran forward and signed frantically. "Is the bad man gone?" Azrael translated. "Yes," Elena signed back, using the gestures she'd learned. "The bad man is gone. I'm safe." Kieran threw his arms around her waist, hugging her tightly. When he pulled back, he signed something else. "What did he say?" Elena asked Azrael. "He said you're brave," the Vampire King translated, his voice soft, "and that you should keep Ember. Not just borrow him, keep him forever, because you need protection more than he does right now." Spring arrived at the Vampire Palace like a secret whispered through the halls. The night gardens burst into bloom, filling the air with perfume that smelled like moonlight and promises. Elena had been there 6 weeks, and somewhere in the routine of sign language lessons and helping Kieran with his studies and late-night conversations with Azrael, she'd stopped thinking about leaving. She stood in the music room, watching, as Kieran placed his small hands against the piano while Mrs. Thorne played. The boy couldn't hear the notes, but he felt them vibrating through the wood, his face alight with wonder at the sensation of music traveling through his bones. "You look happy," Azrael said, appearing in the doorway with his characteristic silence. Elena glanced at him, then back at Kieran. "I didn't remember it was possible. Being happy. It feels strange, like wearing someone else's clothes." "You're wearing your own clothes," Azrael observed. "You just forgot what they felt like." Elena touched the blue dress she was wearing, one of several that had appeared in her wardrobe. "Everything here fits so perfectly. How is that possible?" "The palace recognizes need," Azrael said, moving to stand beside her. "It provides what's necessary. Sometimes before we know, we need it." "Like you," Elena said before she could stop herself. "Appearing when I called. Providing what was necessary." The Vampire King's silver eyes found hers. "Is that what you think I did? Just fulfilled a necessity?" Elena's breath caught. "I don't know what to think about you. You saved my life. You've given me sanctuary. You've let me into your son's world. You've taught me to communicate in ways I forgot I could. And you ask nothing in return. That feels impossible." "I ask one thing," Azrael said quietly. "What?" "Stay." The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning that went beyond simple hospitality. "Not as a guest," he continued. "Not as someone passing through until you find somewhere else. Stay as someone who belongs here, as someone we need." Elena's hands trembled. "I don't understand. You're a king. You could have anyone you wanted. Why would you need me?" "Because Kieran lights up when you enter a room," Azrael said. "Because you see him as a whole person, not a tragedy, to be pitied. Because you've learned his language not out of obligation, but because you wanted to communicate with him. And because," he paused, something vulnerable entering his expression, "when I'm with you, I remember what it felt like to be human. To hope for simple things. To believe that kindness matters more than power." Elena felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. I'm broken, she whispered. Marcus broke something in me that I don't know how to fix. I don't even know who I am without fear shaping every decision. Then stay and find out, Azrael said. Heal here. Learn who you are when you're safe. Discover what you want when no one is telling you what you should want. He took her hand, his touch cool and steady. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not asking for romance or obligation. I'm asking you to be part of this family. To help me raise a son who needs more than one person showing him the world. To be the person who makes this palace feel like home instead of just a beautiful cage. Elena looked at their joined hands, at Kieran spinning in circles, while Mrs. Thorne's piano filled the room with vibrations he could feel, but not hear, at the life being offered to her like a gift she hadn't earned. What if I'm not strong enough? She asked. What if I break again? Then we'll help you heal again, Azrael said simply. That's what family does. The word family settled into Elena's chest like a key finding its lock. She'd been alone for so long, first isolated by Marcus, then isolated by her own survival instincts. The idea of belonging somewhere, of being needed, of having people who would help her heal instead of breaking her further, it was almost too much to believe. Okay, she said. I'll stay. Azrael's entire face transformed, the ice melting into something warm and alive. He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so old-fashioned and courtly that Elena laughed despite her tears. Welcome home, he said. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She wandered the palace corridors, Ember tucked under her arm, thinking about the strange path that had led her here. From a basement where she'd waited to die, to a palace where a vampire king had asked her to stay, where a 6-year-old boy had shared his most precious possession, where an older woman had shown her that kindness didn't have to be earned. She found herself in the library, running her fingers along book spines, and realized Azrael was there, sitting in the darkness near the window. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Too much to think about, Elena admitted. May I join you? He gestured to the chair beside his, and Elena settled into it, tucking her feet under her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of quiet that didn't need filling. Finally, Elena spoke. Tell me about her. Your wife. Azrael was quiet for so long Elena thought he might not answer. Then he said, her name was Lydia. She was a scholar, passionate about ancient languages. She came to the palace researching vampire dialects and stayed because she fell in love with the library. He smiled at the memory. I fell in love with her determination. She wasn't afraid of me, wasn't impressed by titles or power. She just wanted to understand how language shapes culture. How did she die? Elena asked gently. Childbirth, Azrael said. Even with all my power, all my resources, I couldn't save her. She hemorrhaged, and vampire blood can't heal humans the way legends claim. I held her while she died, and she made me promise to raise Kieran with love instead of regret, to show him the world was full of wonder instead of danger. Elena reached over and took his hand. I'm sorry you lost her. I'm sorry Kieran lost his mother. So am I, Azrael said. But her death taught me something important. Power can't protect you from loss. It can't prevent pain. All it can do is give you resources to help others when they need it. Like helping women locked in basements. Like that, he agreed. Elena squeezed his hand. Thank you for telling me about her. Thank you for trusting me with Kieran. Thank you for seeing me when I'd forgotten what being seen felt like. Azrael's silver eyes caught the moonlight. I should thank you. You've reminded me that healing is possible, that families can grow in unexpected ways. That home isn't a place, it's the people who see you and choose to stay anyway. 3 months after Elena arrived at the palace, Asriel announced they were hosting the Spring Renewal Festival, an annual tradition where the vampire court gathered to celebrate the changing season. It's mostly political theater, he explained over breakfast while Kieran built towers from his toast. But it's also a chance to show the court that change is possible. That tradition can evolve. Elena sipped her tea, watching Kieran's architectural endeavors. What kind of change? Asriel's expression turned serious. I want to introduce you and Kieran formally, not as guests but as part of my household. As family. Elena's cup rattled against its saucer. The vampire court doesn't exactly embrace humans, do they? Some do, Asriel said. Mrs. Thorne has earned their respect over decades, but others see humans as lesser beings, temporarily useful, but ultimately disposable. He reached across the table and took her hand. I want them to see what I see, that family isn't defined by blood or species or political advantage, that my son's deafness makes him different, not less, that the woman who teaches him, who makes him laugh, who's become essential to this household, deserves the same respect they'd give any noble vampire. Kieran signed something, and Asriel translated. He wants to know if you'll wear a pretty dress. Elena laughed. I think I can manage that. The week before the festival was chaos. Mrs. Thorne enlisted Elena's help, organizing the kitchens, coordinating with servants Elena hadn't even known existed, planning menus that would satisfy both vampire and human guests. In between, Elena continued her sign language lessons with Kieran, their conversations growing more complex as her vocabulary expanded. One afternoon, while practicing in the garden, Kieran signed something that made Elena's heart skip. What does this mean? She asked Asriel, who was reading nearby. He looked up, saw the gesture, and smiled. Mother. He signed the word for mother. Kieran climbed into Elena's lap, his small hands moving again. What's he saying now? Elena asked, her voice thick. He's saying you feel like what he imagines a mother feels like, Asriel translated gently. Warm and safe, and someone who listens. Elena wrapped her arms around the boy, fighting tears. Kieran pulled back and signed something else, his expression serious. He's asking if it's okay that he thinks of you that way, Asriel said, or if it makes you sad, because you're not really his mother. Elena's hands moved before her brain caught up, signing the gesture Asriel had taught her for family. Then she spoke aloud, knowing Asriel would translate. Being your mother would be an honor, not because I gave birth to you, but because you chose to let me love you. Kieran's face split into the biggest smile Elena had ever seen. He threw his arms around her neck and didn't let go for a long time. The night of the festival arrived with a flurry of final preparations. Elena's room had filled with dresses, courtesy of the palace's mysterious ability to provide what was needed. She chose a gown the color of midnight, embroidered with silver stars that caught the light when she moved. Mrs. Thorne helped her with her hair, weaving it into an intricate braid that would have been impossible for Elena to manage alone. You look like a queen, the older woman said, stepping back to admire her work. I'm just me, Elena protested. Just you is exactly right, Mrs. Thorne said firmly. Don't let those court vampires make you think otherwise. The grand ballroom had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting rainbow prisms across the floor. Tables laden with food lined the walls, both human delicacies and the specially prepared blood wine that vampires preferred. Guests arrived in waves, vampires who'd lived for centuries, wearing fashion from every era imaginable. Elena stood at the edge of the room, Asriel beside her in formal black that made his silver eyes even more striking. Kieran was between them, holding both their hands, wearing a small version of his father's formal attire. The boy's eyes were huge, taking in the crowd, the lights, the spectacle. Are you ready? Asriel signed to his son. Kieran nodded, then signed something that made his father laugh. What did he say? Elena asked. He said the dragons in his stories were less scary than this many vampires in one room, Azrael translated. But he's brave, because we're here. Azrael raised his hand, and the room fell silent. Ancient vampires stopped mid-conversation, turning to face their king with expressions ranging from curious to suspicious. "Thank you all for joining us," Azrael said, his voice carrying through the hall without shouting. "We gather tonight to celebrate renewal, to honor the changing of seasons, to recognize that even immortal beings must adapt and grow." He gestured to Elena and Kieran. "Tonight I introduce you to my family. My son Kieran, who speaks with his hands and sees the world with wisdom beyond his years. And Elena, who has become essential to our household, teaching us all that strength comes in forms we might not expect." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elena saw some vampires nodding, while others looked scandalized. One vampire, an ancient-looking woman draped in emeralds, stepped forward. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Surely you don't mean to suggest this human is of equal standing to those of us who've served the court for centuries?" Elena's stomach clenched, but Azrael's expression didn't change. "Lady Corvina," he said pleasantly, "Elena has done more for my family in 3 months than some have done in 3 centuries. She's earned her place through compassion, dedication, and the kind of courage that comes from choosing kindness even after experiencing cruelty." Lady Corvina's smile tightened. "How touching. But surely your Majesty understands the concern. Humans are so fragile, so temporary. What happens when she ages? When she dies, will you replace her as easily as one replaces servants?" The room went silent, every vampire watching to see how their king would respond. Elena felt Kieran's hand tighten in hers, felt the boy's tension even though he couldn't hear the words being spoken. Azrael's voice, when he spoke, carried a weight that made the chandeliers tremble. "I will not dignify that question with the response you're hoping for, Lady Corvina. But I will say this: power is nothing without compassion. Immortality is nothing without connection. I have lived for 8 centuries, and in that time, I've learned that the most valuable people in your life aren't always the ones who live the longest. They're the ones who make you remember why living matters." He looked at Kieran, then at Elena. "This boy and this woman have taught me more about strength in 3 months than centuries of court politics ever could." Elena felt something shift in the room, the emotional temperature changing. Some vampires were nodding now, their expressions thoughtful. An older vampire with kind eyes stepped forward. "Your Majesty speaks truth," he said. "I've lived long enough to remember when our people valued wisdom over age, character over blood purity. Perhaps it's time we remembered those values again." Others began speaking up, sharing their own thoughts, debating the role of humans in vampire society, the meaning of family, the nature of strength. Azrael let them talk, let the conversation flow, understanding that real change happened through dialogue, not dictates. Kieran tugged on Elena's dress and signed something. She was getting better at reading his signs, but this one was new. "What does this mean?" she asked Azrael quietly. "Proud," he translated. "He's saying he's proud of you for standing there even though you're scared." Elena looked down at the 6-year-old boy, who saw more than most adults, twice his age. "I'm proud of you too," she signed back, using the gesture Azrael had just taught her. The debate continued for another hour. Vampires arguing philosophy and tradition with the intensity of beings who had endless time to discuss such matters. Finally, Azrael raised his hand again, bringing silence. I'm not asking anyone to change their beliefs overnight, he said. I'm simply asking you to see what I see. Talent, compassion, and worth exist in many forms. If we close ourselves off to that possibility, we become exactly the monsters humans fear in their stories. He gestured to a small stage that had been set up near the front of the ballroom. Tonight, my son would like to share something with you. A demonstration of a language many of you don't speak, but all of you can understand. Kieran walked to the stage with his father, his small hand in Azrael's large one. When they reached the center, Azrael signed something to his son, who nodded and began. Elena watched as Kieran's hands moved through the air, telling a story in sign language. His movements were graceful, expressive, his whole body involved in the telling. Azrael stood beside him, translating aloud for the vampires who couldn't understand signs. It was a story about a dragon who was born without fire. Azrael's voice carried through the hall, speaking his son's words. The other dragons said he wasn't a real dragon because he couldn't breathe flames. They said he was broken, useless, wrong. Kieran's hands swept through the air, painting pictures of rejection and loneliness. But one day, a village was threatened by a flood. Not a fire, Azrael continued. And the fireless dragon discovered he could breathe ice instead. He froze the flood water, saved the village, and the other dragons finally understood. Being different didn't mean being less. It just meant having different gifts to offer. The story was simple, clearly written for children, but the message resonated through the ballroom. Elena saw vampires exchanging glances, saw Lady Corvina's expression soften slightly, saw the way people were leaning forward, engaged. When Kieran finished, he bowed the way his father had taught him. The ballroom erupted in applause. Not polite, obligatory clapping, but genuine appreciation, the kind that made Kieran's face light up with joy, even though he couldn't hear the sound. Elena saw Azrael's expression transform as he watched his son take another bow, saw the pride and love written across features that were usually so carefully controlled. The Vampire King signed something to Kieran, who beamed and signed back. Afterward, vampires approached Kieran with genuine curiosity, asking questions through Azrael's translation, some attempting simple signs they'd seen the boy use. Lady Corvina was among them, and when she spoke to Kieran, her voice had lost its earlier frost. "Your story was wise beyond your years, young prince," she said, waiting for Azrael to translate. "Perhaps this old vampire could learn a thing or two from you." Kieran signed something that made several nearby vampires laugh when Azrael translated it. He says everyone can always learn more. Even dragons. Even vampires. Especially vampires. As the night wound down, Elena found herself on a balcony overlooking the palace gardens, needing a moment of quiet after hours of socializing. Azrael joined her, 2 glasses of wine in his hands. "You survived your first vampire court event," he said, offering her a glass. "How do you feel?" "Exhausted," Elena admitted, "but also proud." Kieran was incredible. He was, Azrael agreed, leaning against the balcony rail beside her. "You've helped him find his voice. Taught him that his difference is a strength, not a weakness." "I didn't teach him that," Elena said. "You did, by loving him exactly as he is." "We did it together," Azrael said, and something in his voice made Elena turn to look at him. The moonlight caught his silver eyes, making them glow like starlight. That's what family does. Build each other up, teach each other, grow together. He set down his wine glass and took her hand, his touch cool and steady. "Elena, I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered. "What is it?" "These past 3 months, watching you with Kieran, seeing you bloom from that terrified woman in the basement into someone confident and strong, it's made me realize something." He took a breath, unnecessary for a being who didn't need to breathe, but human habit died hard. I'm falling in love with you. Elena's breath caught, the night air suddenly feeling too thin. Azrael continued, his silver eyes never leaving hers. I know the timing is complicated. I know you're still healing from what Marcus did. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. But I needed you to know. Needed to be honest about what I feel. Elena's hand trembled in his. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Azrael assured her. I just wanted you to know that when I asked you to stay, it wasn't just for Kieran's sake. It was because somewhere between rescuing you and watching you heal, I started imagining a future where you're here not just as Kieran's teacher or our friend, but as my partner. If you'll have me. Elena looked out at the garden, at the night blooming flowers glowing softly in the darkness. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 months ago, locked in a basement, whispering a legend's name because she had nothing left to lose. She thought about the woman she was becoming, learning sign language, making a child laugh, standing in front of vampire nobility without flinching. I'm terrified, she admitted, not of you, but of letting myself hope, of believing I deserve this kind of happiness. What if I'm not enough? What if I disappoint you? What if I can't be what you need? Azrael turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. You already are what I need. You're kind when you could have become cruel. You're brave when you could have stayed broken. You love my son not because you have to, but because you choose to. Elena, you're exactly enough. A tear slipped down Elena's cheek. I think I'm falling in love with you too. But I'm scared of what that means. Scared of needing someone again after Marcus made me feel like needing was weakness. Needing isn't weakness, Azrael said softly. Needing is human. It's the foundation of connection, of family, of love. And the difference between Marcus and me is that I'll never use your needs as weapons against you. He wiped away her tear with his thumb. We'll go as slowly as you need. No expectations, no pressure. Just 2 people learning how to be together. 2 broken people finding out they fit. Elena looked up at this vampire king who'd saved her life and given her a home and loved his son with a fierceness that transcended species. She thought about Kieran asking if she'd be his mother, about Mrs. Thorne teaching her to braid her hair, about waking up without fear for the first time in years. Can I kiss you? She asked. His eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across his usually controlled features. Are you sure? Elena nodded. I need to know what hope tastes like. Azrael cupped her face in his hands, giving her every chance to change her mind. When she didn't step back, he leaned in slowly, so slowly, until his lips met hers. The kiss was gentle, reverent, nothing like Marcus's demands or possessive claims. This was a question and an answer, a promise and a possibility. His lips were cool against hers, but not cold, just different, just him. When they pulled apart, Elena was crying and smiling at the same time. That tastes like hope, she said, like coming home, like everything I thought I'd lost. They stood on the balcony, wrapped in each other, while the festival continued below. Eventually, they returned to the ballroom, where Kieran immediately spotted them and ran over, signing rapidly. What's he saying? Elena asked, still learning to read his faster signs. He wants to know if you're happy, Azrael translated, and if we can all have dessert together, because the chocolate cake is very important and shouldn't be eaten alone. Elena laughed and signed yes, watching Kieran's face light up. The three of them sat together at a small table, sharing chocolate cake while vampires danced and socialized around them. Kieran got frosting on his nose. Asriel signed stories that made his son giggle silently, and Elena felt something settle in her chest that she'd thought was gone forever. Peace, safety, belonging. A week later, Asriel made an announcement to the court. He was establishing a new tradition. Every vampire in the palace would learn basic sign language, making Kieran's primary method of communication accessible to everyone. Additionally, he was creating a scholarship program for human children with disabilities, providing resources and education that would help them thrive. Some vampires grumbled about the changes, but most embraced them. Lady Corvina, surprisingly, became one of the program's strongest advocates, claiming that 800 years of life had taught her that pride was less valuable than progress. Elena watched as the palace transformed. Guards practiced signs with each other in the hallways. Servants learned to communicate with Kieran directly instead of through translators. The library expanded to include books on disability history, on sign language, on building inclusive communities. One evening, 6 months after Elena had arrived, she was reading in the library when she found Asriel's wife's journal. The leather was worn soft with age, the pages filled with flowing handwriting. Elena knew she should probably put it back, that this was private, but something made her open to a random page. "If I don't survive childbirth," Lydia had written, "I need Asriel to know that love isn't betrayal. If he finds someone who makes him laugh again, who loves our son, who reminds him that life is for living and not just surviving, he should embrace that gift. He should let himself be happy. I want my death to teach him about loss, but I don't want it to teach him to stop loving. Promise me, my darling Asriel, that if someone good comes into your life, you won't push them away, because you think loyalty to my memory means living alone. Love Kieran. Love yourself. And if the universe is kind enough to send you someone else to love, don't refuse that kindness." Elena closed the journal carefully, tears streaming down her face. She heard footsteps and looked up to find Asriel in the doorway. "I found your wife's journal," Elena admitted. "I know I shouldn't have read it, but I did, and I think she would want you to know that I love her son. And I love you. And I'm not trying to replace her. I'm just trying to be part of what comes next." Asriel crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. "Lydia would have liked you," he said. "She would have appreciated your strength, your kindness. She would have been grateful that Kieran has you in his life." Elena buried her face in his chest. "I want to marry you. Not right away. Not until I'm sure I'm healed enough to make that choice from strength instead of fear. But someday. I want to be your wife. I want to be Kieran's mother. I want to build a life here that's real and lasting and ours." "Someday soon," Asriel agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Whenever you're ready, I'll be here." A year after Elena whispered Asriel Tenebris's name in a dark basement, she stood in the palace chapel, wearing a dress the color of starlight. Kieran stood beside her, holding the rings on a velvet pillow, his face serious with the importance of his role. Mrs. Thorne dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, crying happy tears she didn't bother hiding. The chapel was small, intimate, filled with white flowers and candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Only those closest to them attended, a handful of vampires who'd become friends, the household staff who'd become family, and Kieran, who'd insisted on being both ring-bearer and best man. Asriel stood at the altar in midnight black. His silver eyes locked on Elena as she walked toward him. There was no one to give her away. She'd given herself away years ago to a man who'd nearly destroyed her. But this time, she walked freely, choosing with clear eyes and a healed heart. The ceremony was simple. They'd written their own vows, speaking promises to each other that had nothing to do with obeying or possessing, and everything to do with partnership, respect, and love that allowed space for growth. When it came time for the rings, Kieran signed something to Elena before handing them over. What did he say? Elena asked Azrael. He said, "Welcome to our family officially," the Vampire King translated, his voice thick with emotion, "and that he loves you." Elena knelt down to Kieran's level and signed back, "I love you too. Thank you for sharing your father with me. Thank you for teaching me that family isn't about blood. It's about choosing each other every day." Kieran threw his arms around her neck, not caring that he was wrinkling her dress. When he pulled back, he signed to his father, who laughed. "He says we're taking too long and he wants cake," Azrael reported. Elena stood, took Azrael's hand, and they finished the ceremony. When the officiant pronounced them married, Azrael pulled her close and kissed her with a tenderness that still made her heart race. The small gathering cheered, Kieran's silent clapping the loudest approval of all. The reception was held in the courtyard garden, among the night-blooming flowers Kieran loved. They ate cake, danced to music Kieran could feel through the ground, and celebrated the strange, beautiful family they'd become. As the evening wound down, Elena found herself on the same balcony where Azrael had first told her he was falling in love with her. The Vampire King joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked. "Impossibly so," Elena said, leaning into him. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life, that I get to have this." "You deserve it," Azrael said firmly. "You've always deserved it." Elena thought about the woman she'd been, locked in darkness, whispering a name she didn't believe in. She thought about the journey from that basement to this balcony, from fear to love, from isolation to family. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't called your name?" she asked. "Every day," Azrael admitted. "And every day I'm grateful you did. Grateful you were brave enough to reach for help, even when hope seemed impossible." Kieran appeared in the doorway, signing that he was tired. Elena and Azrael walked him to his room together, the three of them a unit now, official and real. They tucked Kieran into bed, Ember the dragon positioned protectively on his pillow. The boy signed goodnight to both of them, adding a new sign he'd been practicing. "Family," he signed, pointing to each of them in turn. "Forever." "Forever," Elena and Azrael signed back. After Kieran fell asleep, they returned to their own rooms. Now shared, now theirs together. Elena changed out of her wedding dress, hanging it carefully in the wardrobe. She caught her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. This woman stood straight, her eyes bright, her expression peaceful. No bruises, no fear. Just a wife, a mother, a woman who'd learned that surviving wasn't the same as living, and had chosen to do both. Azrael came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I used to think power was something that happened to you," Elena said. "Something that kept you trapped, or hurt you, or controlled you. But real power is having choices, having people who see you, having a voice that's heard, having love that heals instead of harms." She turned in his arms to face him. "Thank you for showing me what power could be, what love should be, what family means." Azrael kissed her forehead. "Thank you for trusting me enough to stay, for giving us a chance, for loving my son, for teaching us both that healing is possible." They stood together in the candlelight, vampire and human, king and former prisoner, two broken people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to build something whole. Outside their window, the night gardens bloomed, filling the air with perfume and possibility. Inside the palace, servants and vampires moved through hallways where sign language had become as common as spoken words, where difference was celebrated instead of hidden, where one woman's desperate whisper had started a revolution in how families were built and futures were imagined. Kieran slept peacefully, his dragon guardian watching over his dreams. Mrs. Thorne puttered in the kitchens, already planning tomorrow's breakfast. The vampire court, scattered across the realm, slowly learned that tradition could evolve without losing its meaning, that progress didn't mean abandoning the past, just choosing which parts to carry forward. And in a bedroom carved from midnight stone, a woman who'd once been locked in a basement to starve lay beside the vampire king who'd answered her call, both of them breathing in sync, despite only one of them needing air. Both of them whole, because they'd chosen to be whole together. Elena's last thought before sleep was simple. She'd called a name in the darkness, and light had answered. She'd reached for help, and found family. She'd whispered into the void, and the void had whispered back, "I see you. I've got you. You're safe now." And finally, after so many years of fear, she believed it.